Today, we're moving from the front end to the other side of the web application, the back end. Our goal is to understand how the front end and back end communicate, and then build and connect a simple back end with the assistance of AI. In session 1, we focused on the front end and on getting comfortable with the basic development workflow. First, we got familiar with the roles of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML for the content and structure, CSS for presentation, and JavaScript for interaction. We also worked with a Git repository, so we could keep track of changes to our code and share the project through GitHub. And finally, we practiced working inside an IDE together with an AI harness, where the coding agent could inspect the project, modify files, and help us carry out development tasks. So by the end of session 1, we were already able to build and manage a front-end project with the help of AI. When we talk about the front end, we are mainly talking about two things: the look of the web page and the interaction that happens when a user does something. All of the front-end source code, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, is loaded into the memory of the web browser. The browser then uses the HTML and CSS to render what the page looks like and executes the JavaScript to handle the interaction. So, at this stage, everything we have built is happening inside the user's browser. But many web applications need to do more than just display a page and respond to user interaction. Usually, a web app needs further processing according to its business logic. For that, we introduce another part of the application, the backend. So now, instead of having everything happen only inside the browser, the front end can ask the backend to perform some work for it. So now we have the front end on one side and the back end on the other. When the front end needs something from the back end, it sends an HTTP request. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The back end exposes an API that the front end can communicate with. API stands for Application Programming Interface. After receiving and processing the request, the back end sends an HTTP response back to the front end. So the basic pattern is HTTP request goes to the API and HTTP response comes back. Now, let's look more closely at the HTTP request that the front end sends. An HTTP request contains different pieces of information. For now, let's divide them into two parts, the header and the body. Inside the header, one important piece of information is the URL, in other words, where we want to send the request. Another important piece is the method, which tells the backend what action we want to perform. Some common HTTP methods are get, post, put or patch, and delete. Get is normally used to fetch data. Post is used to send new data. Put or patch is used to update data. And delete, as the name suggests, is used to delete data. The header can also contain authentication data, so that the backend can know who is making the request, as well as other metadata needed for the communication. Then we have the body. The body is where we can put data that we want to send along with the request. In the simple cases that we will work with, we mainly need a body when using post or put/patch, because those operations need to send new or updated data to the backend. Next, let's look at where those requests are actually sent. A backend usually provides several API endpoints. We normally start with a base URL, which identifies the backend server, and then add different endpoint paths for different operations. For example, an endpoint such as /API/items with the get method could be used to fetch the list of items. The same /API/items endpoint with post could be used to create a new item with a new data placed in the request body. If we want to work with one particular item, we might have something like /API/item/itemIt. With GET, we fetch that particular item. With put, we update it. And with delete, we delete it. So an endpoint and an HTTP method work together to tell the backend what operation we want. Here is an example of how that comes together. We take the base URL, add the endpoint for a particular item, and substitute the actual item ID into the URL. So when the front end sends a GET request to that URL, the backend knows that we are asking it to fetch that specific item. This is how the front end selects not only which backend to contact, but also which operation or resource inside that backend it wants to use. Once the backend has received and processed the request, it sends an HTTP response back to the front end. For our purposes, there are two parts of the response that I would like you to recognize. The first is information in the header. The second is the payload, the actual data being returned. Among the information in the header, one thing we should know is the HTTP status code. And one of the most common formats for the payload is JSON. The HTTP status code tells the client what happened to its request. You do not need to memorize a long list of codes. For now, just remember the broad groups. A code beginning with 2 means success. A code beginning with 4 means that something is wrong with the request. And a code beginning with 5 means that something went wrong at the server. A few common examples are useful to recognize. 200 OK simply means it worked. 201 created means that a new item was successfully created. 400 bad request means there was something wrong with what the client sent. 404 not found means that the requested item or endpoint does not exist. And 500 internal server error means that something went wrong on the server side. So the status code gives the front end a quick indication of whether the operation succeeded or failed, and roughly why. Now let's move to the payload. One of the most common payload formats used between a front end and a back end is JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. JSON is simply a text format for organizing data as pairs of a key and a value. Because it is text, it can easily be sent across the network, and it is very commonly used when a front end and a back end exchange data. Here is a very simple example. We have a person called Malaya. On the left side of each pair, we have the key, for example, name, age, student, and hobbies. On the right side, we have the corresponding value. The value can be text, such as Malaya. It could be a number, such as 20. It could be a Boolean value, such as true. And it can also be a list, such as the list of hobbies. So when you see JSON later in the workshop, you can think of it simply as structured, labeled data. So this is the basic picture we will use today. The front end sends an HTTP request to one of the backend's API endpoints. The backend performs the requested work and sends an HTTP response back, usually with a status code and, when needed, data such as JSON. In the hands-on part, we're going to experience this entire flow ourselves.